Welcome back to Module 1, Lesson 2 of your Professional Diploma in Graphic Design with Shaw Academy. I hope you've gained some valuable insight from Lesson 1, and I believe that you are as excited as I am to start with Lesson 2. I'm sure that I don't have to introduce myself again, but in case you forgot, my name is Annerie du Plessis. I would like to inspire you with a quote that I remind myself of every time I tackle a design project. This quote by famous French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry states that a designer knows he has achieved perfection, not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. Please keep this in mind from now on and try and make this a rule you apply to all your designs. It literally is based on the principle of less is more. As you know by now, you can access our courses in two ways. The first way is via our app. If you have not done so already, simply download our app from the Apple Play Store. Remember to allow notifications to get reminders of our courses. In your app, you will notice a large countdown timer indicating when your next lesson will start. At the bottom, you can click on Courses to gain more information on your enrolled course. Life happens and we know that you can't always attend lessons. And that's why you can simply watch a recording at a time and place that's most convenient for you. The same applies to our website. Simply go to shawacademy.com and click on Login. From here, you can select your desired action from the menu bar. You have been introduced to Morpheus, who is our AI bot. As always, simply ask Morpheus a question, and if you would rather speak to your class, you can ask them as well. Please remember to rate Morpheus' response, as this will help him to serve you better and your fellow students as well. Your other resort is to simply send me an email at support@shawacademy.com, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Let's start off with a fun quiz. Do you know which typeface is the most hated by graphic designers? Is it Coles MT, Comic Sans, Times New Roman, or Papyrus? You can simply type A, B, C, or D into Morpheus' text box. Stick around as I will reveal the answer later in this lesson. Today we will focus on the foundation of good design. We refer to this foundation as the elements as well as the principles of design and how to combine them into a visual unity. The elements of design are the building blocks of your design, and the principles are how we apply these building blocks. To put it into simpler terms, imagine that you are in charge of a large building project. As the project manager, you will need the necessary building material as well as a team of builders and architects to construct your client's dream home. The building material we refer to as the elements of design. The team of people you will be working with we can refer to as the principles when it comes to graphic design. What this means is that the elements are the physical ingredients or building blocks we use to construct our design. The principles refer to how we apply these elements in an effective manner. The end result of successfully applying these elements, our building material, and principles, our team, is a successful building project, which we refer to as effective visual hierarchy. Neither can exist without the other, so both are equally important. As you are familiar with the elements we discussed in Lesson 1, can you recall what they are? Remember, we had 7 elements we referred to. They are space, line, shape, size, texture, value, as well as color. Today we will also focus on how to successfully apply these elements. The principles of design consist out of focal point, contrast, balance, movement, pattern, unity, and the very important theory of Gestalt. Now, what happens if we do not successfully apply our elements and principles of design? You guessed it, we have a failed building project. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how well you know any of the design programs. If you do not have a strong foundation, your designs will not be effective and won't convey the correct message, and that's exactly why this lesson is so important. In this lesson, we refer to the 7 elements of design, which you're familiar with by now. Note that these elements might differ from source, and you might get more or less depending on the source you consult. but at the end of the day, they all come down to the same foundation. You might want to make a note on these elements and principles as you will apply them to every single design you create from now on. We will discuss all our elements and principles in more detail, starting with our very first element, space. I want you to imagine how this slide would look like without the use of effective space. If you're struggling, don't worry, I'll make it easy for you. This is what we like to call visual clutter. Can you actually make out what the slide is about? You probably will, but it will take quite a lot of unnecessary time. The point I'm trying to make is that space is not something we should fear, but rather an element that should form part of your design. As implied, space is the area we use to design. It is resembled by the empty areas on your design, which we refer to as white or negative space. Note that we refer to it as white space since it resembles the white of a page. I, however, prefer the term negative space as it is not always white. The elements that actually fill your page, like images and text, are referred to as positive space. The closer elements like images and text are to each other on a design, the more difficult it is for your viewer to make sense of. Space also helps to guide your viewer and will make a piece more legible and comfortable to read. Space is thus essential for legibility as well as aesthetics. It thus allows your design to breathe and provides your viewer with a visual rest. We can refer to line as the primal element, since all other elements consist out of some form of line, except for space, of course. A line can be straight, curved, or broken up, thick or thin, vertical, horizontal, or diagonal. As mentioned, lines are the basic forms of all design, but combining them creates a sophisticated design and the illusion of an image. We can even go as far and say that line can also be implied, meaning that we do not necessarily need a physical line to be present. Even shape, which is our next element, is in fact line in a closed form. The type of lines used will even evoke different emotions and convey different meanings. Think about strong diagonal lines. What comes to mind when viewing this? I bet you it is definitely not a sense of calmness, but rather a sense of urgency and excitement. Diagonal lines are dynamic and will be mostly used to convey motion, agility, and strength. A thin horizontal line will convey a sense of elegance and sophistication. It will probably be used for a more formal approach. Consider where you have witnessed thin horizontal lines and the reason why they were used. The same can be said about thin vertical lines. But unlike horizontal lines that resemble calmness, vertical lines would much rather convey a message of success and excellence. By simply adjusting the space and thickness of your lines, you will be able to convey yet another type of emotion. Thick vertical lines can convey a sense of growth and stability, just like a pillar. Even using specific color will also change the meaning of your line. As mentioned, shape can be defined as a closed form of line. Shape can also be referred to as form. We have three kinds of shapes: organic, inorganic, as well as abstract. Organic shapes, like the name implies, are natural and usually found in nature. They convey a sense of spontaneity and are pleasing. Inorganic shapes are geometric in form and usually man-made and can resemble squares, triangles, and circles. These shapes convey more order and structure. Abstract shapes are simplified forms of real objects, like the sign to indicate male or female restrooms. Think about the stick figure icons at a public restroom. They do not resemble a human body perfectly, but they convey the message perfectly. This is a great example of an abstract shape. A circle, which is an inorganic shape, resembles eternity, grace, is more feminine, and also resembles a sense of power and protection. A rectangle or square conveys a message of stability, honesty, and order. Think about text columns that are implied rectangles and the order they bring to a design. A rectangle or square is also more masculine than a circle. A triangle, on the other hand, can have different meanings depending on the direction it points. A triangle can even be an arrow and create a sense of direction or power. If a triangle, however, points downwards, it creates a sense of tension, alertness, and aggression. Going back to our quiz again, we asked which typeface is most hated by graphic designers around the world. Which option do you think is most hated? If you guessed B, Comic Sans, you are correct. Congratulations, you've just won a blown up dartboard. You can expect it in your post in the next week. Not really. So the most hated typeface is Comic Sans, followed closely by Papyrus. Designer Ben Harmon even went as far as to combine these typefaces, and he called it Comic Papyrus. You can actually download this font for free. Simply search Comic Papyrus in your search engine. The question is, why on earth would designers hate these fonts? Personally, I believe that it is not in the way the font looks or was designed, as there's nothing wrong with the fonts themselves, but simply the fact that it has been overused for the wrong purposes. It is thus very important to understand the mood a font communicates and use that mood in conjunction with the rest of your design. We will speak about the use of typefaces in more depth at a later stage. The next element is size, also known as scale or mass. Size is relative with regards to other elements and the proximity of those elements. Size is important in that it draws attention to larger elements on a page and thus plays a significant role when it comes to creating emphasis as well as hierarchy. It also aids in making less important elements on a page to be not emphasized as much. It is quite obvious to say that the circle on the right is way bigger than the circle on the left. If we compare the second option, it seems as though both circles are closer together. But in fact, by simply increasing the size of the smaller circle on the left, like on the previous version, it appears to be closer. Moving on, the next option shows us that the circle on the left is way bigger than the circle on the right, where in fact the circle on the right has constantly been the same size. It seemed big at first, but after adding an even bigger circle, it seems quite insignificant now. This proves our point that size is relative to other elements. Moving on, texture does not need to be physical or tactile, but it can be implied or visual too. We are able to create implied texture in 2 dimensions by making use of the design elements. Texture is created by simply repeating shapes or lines in a continuous manner to form a texture. Depending on the project at hand, texture can be used in different ways. For example, when creating a logo, however, keep texture to a minimum, as it makes your logo difficult to view and resize. Texture actually allows to keep things relative by creating a sense of depth and making items seem more three-dimensional. Texture was able to create a more three-dimensional appearance on these two-dimensional surfaces. Texture also acts as a secondary element, giving support to the main image, reinforcing the visual concept. Value refers to tones of light and dark and also plays an important role in the element of color. The tones between light and dark can be referred to as shades of grey or grayscale. In the same way as when making use of color, we make use of value to place emphasis on certain aspects of our design. If you are making use of value and there is no color present in your artwork, it is important to have a lot of contrast between these shades of grey in order to create emphasis. The use of only one color with a different value is known as a monochromatic color scheme. A handy tip that I would like to share with you is that when you are designing something, try and visualize what it would look like in grayscale. If you can't see a lot of contrast when it is done in grayscale, or if the items you wanted to have emphasized do not stand out anymore, reconsider your use of color, especially when it comes to logo design. This logo seems very sophisticated, modern, and classy. But when converted to grayscale, you can immediately see there's almost no value difference between the navy background and the bronze logo. However, Simply changing the background gives the logo more contrast, and thus, when converted to grayscale, the value quality is preserved. We are drawn to high contrast and would much rather prefer a design with a lot of contrast, and thus, understanding value is very important. Is everybody still with me? Let's do a quiz to see how well you understand the elements of design so far. Which element can also be referred to as form? Is it value, shape, space, or size? You can simply type A, B, C, or D into Morpheus's text box. You're also welcome to look at your notes if you made any. The correct answer is shape. Remember when we said that shape is a closed form of line? Moving on, we will look at our last element before we discuss the principles of design. Color is one of the design elements that is so vast we will actually spend quite some time on it. It is probably one of the most powerful elements a designer can make use of to convey a message. Thus, understanding it is crucial. It not only involves the visual aspect, but also a psychological aspect. When it comes to color, the actual tone and value can also change the mood, and color can also mean different things in different cultures. It is a topic that needs to be researched intensely before just combining a variety of colors, especially when it comes to designing something for a culture you are not too familiar with. Good design should work in the absence of color and should enhance the features of the design. It should not simply be used as the design itself. Again, as with value, desaturate your design, and if it doesn't work, you should reconsider your use of color. I would like to give you some insight on the meanings of color in different cultures by looking at the color white. As with most cultures, the color white is a symbol of purity, innocence, goodness, and light. It normally has a positive connotation. But did you know that white resembles mourning in the Chinese culture? It is associated with death and can be seen quite a lot at Chinese funerals. Do you know and understand the symbolic meaning of colors in your culture? On the point of enhancing, can you see how the Apple logo still retains its shape or form even with the absence of color as well as value? Whether you are colorblind or not, you should still be able to identify this as the Apple logo. This is what makes logo design successful. Color also aids in creating contrast, and certain colors can complement each other very well, whilst other colors don't look good together at all. If the use of color exhausts you and you really need to focus to read or view the image, don't use that combination. Color has the ability to group and organize elements together. It creates impact and also evokes emotion. But in order to achieve all this, you will need to understand color theory. We will look at the color wheel and how to combine colors using this feature. The color wheel can be broken up into 12 colors that consist out of the primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue, the secondary colors, which are green, purple, and orange, as well as the tertiary colors, which are blue-green, blue-purple, red-purple, red-orange, yellow-orange, and yellow-green. These colors can be combined in numerous ways, which we like to refer to as color schemes. This includes complementary colors, which are colors opposite each other on the color wheel. Tetradic or rectangular color scheme, which uses two pairs of complementary colors. Analogous colors, which are colors next to each other on the color wheel. Please be careful with combining too many colors next to each other when it comes to this color scheme. We have the triadic color scheme, which uses 3 colors evenly spaced around the color wheel. There's the square color scheme, which uses 4 colors evenly spaced around the color wheel. And then last but not least, split complementary color schemes, which, similar to complementary color schemes, uses colors opposite each other on the color wheel, but instead of 2 colors, we'll split the 1 color and use 2 adjacent colors from that split color. Please make a note on these color schemes as they will come in quite handy. Splitting the color wheel in half between yellow and purple will actually divide the colors between warm and cool. Have you noticed that when combining color schemes that most of them include both warm and cool colors? When making use of a color scheme, it is important to have one dominant color and one submissive color. If you are not sure how to determine this, note that warmer colors tend to be more dominant. Moving on to the color properties, we have hue, saturation, and value. Hue can be defined as the type of color you are choosing. In other words, a synonym for hue can also be the word color. Saturation refers to the intensity of a hue or color, and value refers to the lightness or darkness of a color. Understanding the color properties allows you to be even more creative when it comes to designing. Remember when we mentioned that the warmer colors on a color wheel tend to be more dominant? Now imagine that you would much rather want the cool colors to be dominant. You guessed it, you will simply apply color properties to downscale the warmer color. An example would be to bring down the saturation of a warm color to make it more subtle. We will actually look at a practical example a bit later in this lesson. I would like to show you an example of how color have been applied successfully to a composition. This example boasts with a tetradic color scheme of red, orange, blue, and green. Can you see the use of colors here? Not really? Well, let's look carefully. We'll start with the easiest first. Green is very obvious in the grass as well as blue in the night sky. But where do I get orange and red from? Remember the color properties we just spoke about? Orange is visible in the big trees outlining the smaller bonsai tree in the center. The value of orange has been increased by simply adding black to form an almost black orange. But where do I get red from? Again, looking at the bonsai tree in the center, the value has been decreased, meaning that white has been added to the red. What happens to red if you add white? Yes, it changes to pink. You will also notice that the cooler colors in this example is dominant, creating a nice balance. After explaining the use of color on this image, can you see what I mean? Having discussed the elements of design, we will now look at how to apply them. We refer to this as the principles of design. The principles of design consist out of focal point or emphasis, contrast, balance, movement, rhythm or pattern, unity, and also the theory of Gestalt. The first principle we will look at is focal point or emphasis. The focal point is the most important visual on your artboard. It is the visual that draws your attention first. But how can we make the visual stand out? By simply applying the elements of design effectively. Think specifically in terms of using color, size, and value to place emphasis on your most important element. A rule when it comes to focal point is to only have one per page or design. You can't have two focal points competing for attention. If you have either no focal point or more than one, it will not be a focal point anymore. Which part of this poster do you consider as the focal point? And why do you say this? You most probably saw the pizza first. The reason being that the texture is quite different from the rest of the advert. Also, the use of color as well as its size in relation to other elements makes this pizza stand out as well. The pizza is the only element that deviates from the color scheme and style. Do you also realize that there is only one focal point? We do have a secondary focal point, which in my opinion is the pizza shop sign, but it does not compete with the actual pizza. Contrast can be applied in almost any way. Simply using the elements of design in opposing ways will add contrast. Texture versus smooth, small versus large, dark versus light, positive space versus negative space. Even combining different patterns or textures can also create contrast. The options are literally endless. Contrast allows us to emphasize key elements, and without it, your design will look uninteresting. We can even go as far and say that if there is no contrast, chances are that you do not have a focal point either. Look at how effectively contrast has been applied to this artwork. By simply making use of color and shapes, the designer was able to create an effective design. The use of color also helps to convey a message and emotion. It might even seem as though the highlighted parts of this face is being lit by a candlelight, considering the use of color and contrast. Balance can be achieved in two ways: symmetrical balance as well as asymmetrical balance, as long as each side carries equal weight. As the name implies, symmetrical balance is when the two opposing sides are reflections of one another. Asymmetrical balance, on the other hand, is when the two opposing sides are unequal but still form a balance. This is usually visually more pleasing. What type of balance is applied in this example? It would be symmetrical balance. If we had to divide this composition vertically, both these halves would be mirrored versions of each other. The next example is a form of asymmetrical balance. By dividing this composition either vertically or horizontally or diagonally, none of the sides would mirror each other. However, they still form a balance due to the abstract repetition of elements. Movement refers to the principle that good design controls the eye's flow through a composition. This means that the most important element should lead to the second most important, and so on. Movement also needs to be balanced. Too much movement will exhaust your viewer, so learn to use it sparingly. Interestingly, due to the fact that we read from top to bottom and left to right, we tend to view items as such. You will notice a lot of designs will have a big bold heading at the top, and the least important elements will be at the bottom due to the way we read and view things. It is not a good idea to have your most important element at the top, your second most important element way at the bottom, and then the rest of the information scattered throughout your composition. This causes too much movement and your viewer won't know where to look. This image is a great example of how movement have been applied by not only making use of the composition, but also by making use of elements like arrows. Pattern is also known as rhythm. A continuous pattern can also create movement. This is linked to repetition that eventually forms a unity the whole design fits into. It basically brings the whole design together. Think of it as following a theme by combining the elements and principles. The repetition of certain elements will form a rhythm or pattern. Pattern can have two meanings, whereas the first is simply the repetition of elements. As seen in this example, the use of dialogue bubbles creates a pattern that has been applied to all the pages of this brochure, along with the use of the repetitive colors and textures. The second example of pattern is linked to the standardization of elements in a consistent manner. Think about the use of a website. You know that the menu bar is at the top of the website since this has become a standard feature for websites. This is thus linked to the user-friendliness of the design and creates a thinking pattern in your mind. Unity, also known as harmony, refers to all elements and principles on the composition working together and communicating with one voice. It relates to the consistency of the design and making sure all the elements relate with one another. Unity helps to create order, and hence this is why the theory of Gestalt links well with unity. At the end of the day, if all your elements and principles do not form a unity, you will need to reconsider your design approach. Unity can also be applied to various designs or compositions within a project. I like to refer to unity as the theme of a project. Think about a corporate identity and the same elements that are applied to the letterhead, email signature, as well as business card. What do you think about this example of unity? Does it work for you? Absolutely nothing in this example is unified. Firstly, you have a diagonal gradient, with a repetition of black dots, then some striped gradient lights. This is an excellent example of how not to use the design elements in conjunction with one another. Every single element on this design screams for attention, and there is no theme or unity that flows. Our brains will form a pattern in what might seem as visual chaos. And this is where the 4 laws of Gestalt guide us, specifically in graphic design. The 4 laws consist of proximity, similarity, continuity, and closure. The Gestalt principle is based on the theory that the brain automatically arranges and simplifies objects to make things easier to understand. Proximity is our first law, and it relates to the distance between elements or objects. The closer objects are to one another in relation to each other, the more they seem to be related or unified. Having this group of circles, we can all agree that it seems as though they belong together. But if we move 3 of the circles to the right, it seems as though we have 2 groups of circles. We still have the same circles, but due to the distance between them, they seem to no longer belong together. Where then is proximity applied? Well, let's try again. I want you to closely examine these symbols. Can you recognize any of them? I'm sure you can identify some of the shapes. You've probably identified a bee. We have a beetroot in the form of a heart, a fish, a dove, and so on. But my question is actually, where have you seen these specific icons before? Do you still don't know? If you did, good on you. But most of us will only realize when I change the proximity of these symbols. Have any of you ever seen this logo? Yes, this is the Unilever logo, and we can all clearly identify that it forms the letter U by simply changing the proximity of each icon. Another way our minds group things together is based on similarity. If design elements or objects are similar in size, shape, or even color, our minds perceive it as being unified. Due to similarity in shape and motion, these circles look quite unified. But by simply changing one aspect, we will be able to break them apart. Continuity links to the principle of movement, which we spoke about earlier. Our minds will follow a line instead of breaking it up. Think about a cross. We do not see it as 4 separate lines, but rather we view it as one horizontal line overlapping one vertical line. The same principle can be applied to the official Olympic Games logo. If someone asked you to describe the Olympic logo, how would you describe it? 5 multicolored circles joined together. Well, this is exactly what the principle of continuity is about. We do not view different circles being cut up, but rather 5 circles joined together. Our minds will fill in gaps and see illusions that actually do not exist. This is known as the Gestalt principle of closure. Closure is a very clever way of creating logo concepts nowadays, and it makes use of a clever way in combining positive and negative space. You might think you are seeing a triangle, but in fact, you are simply viewing 3 evenly spaced sliced circles. Another great example of the Gestalt principle, closure at play, is the FedEx logo. Can you identify how closure plays a role here? I want you to look carefully at the letters and think specifically with regards to negative space. Can you see it? Let me know by typing what you see in Morpheus's text box. Examining the logo, you will see that there is an arrow between the letter E and X. Let's look at another example. Everybody is probably familiar with the Toblerone chocolate logo. But have you ever witnessed the Gestalt principle of closure at play here? Once you see it, you will never unsee it. There is a bear hidden in the mountain. We have gone through a lot of info, so why not recap by doing another quiz? Closure is the Gestalt principle that refers to the principle of movement, the distance between certain elements, elements that are similar in size, shape, and color, or filling in the gaps and create the illusion of an image. You know the drill by now, simply type A, B, C, or D. The correct answer is D, and it was the last principle we just discussed. Remember the FedEx logo example? This is what we refer to. All of these elements and principles we have mentioned is objective, and there might be more or less depending on who you speak with. At the end, the design elements and principles will always be based on the same building blocks, and we will always have the same end result, no matter what you call them. Having said this, effective visual hierarchy is the end result of using your elements and principles of design effectively. Visual hierarchy relates to the order of elements on your composition. It has to do with what you see first, second, third, and so on. As mentioned, you will need to identify the most important element on your composition, and by combining the elements and principles of design, you can be sure that this element is the focal point. This is all that visual hierarchy is about. Visual hierarchy normally applies to mostly text elements, but other visuals can also be influenced. Let's look at how visual hierarchy has been applied. Again, considering that we read from left to right and top to bottom, the first word element we see is replace. Not only is that at the top, but it is also way bigger than all the other type elements. The next element that catches your eye is probably the light bulb, and then the wording underneath replace. Lastly, you will notice the smaller wording at the bottom of the page where your eye exits the page. The aim of your elements and principles at the end is to make sure that the most important element, in other words your focal point, is seen first, and this is exactly what visual hierarchy is about. If you're not sure what the most important elements are, it is normally the heading and also perhaps a related image that might be second in line. Before we finish off, I want to briefly introduce the design cycle to you. We will look into more detail about this process in lesson 3, so try and memorize them. And then we will also get to work in Illustrator in the next lesson. The design cycle or pipeline basically entails a list of steps to get a design from concept to present phase. These steps include briefing, research and brainstorming, thumbnails, production, as well as present. Briefing entails the process of meeting up with your client and obtaining all the necessary info needed to complete the design project. You can make use of a client brief, which is similar to interview questions to determine your client's wants and needs. The research and brainstorming phase is where you will need to get as much information about the company, its competitors, as well as all the relevant design information that will guide you in the creation of your artwork. Thumbnailing entails the process of using reference images and coming up with your very own unique concept. This is where the design process starts, but there are the rough drawings before you move on to your computer. Step 4 is the production phase, on where you actually create the artwork on your computer, making use of the programs you will learn in this course. And the last step, present, is when you provide the client with your finalized design and they either approve or ask for changes. I would like to leave you with an exercise that we will make use of in our next lesson. This exercise should not take you more than 5 minutes. Let's pretend that you have a friend, his name is Fred, and he wants to open a coffee shop. Fred does not have the capital to pay for a professional designer with years of experience and asked you to help him out instead. In return, he will give you a voucher to spend at his coffee shop as soon as it opens. You agree to this because you simply love coffee, and at least you will be famous because your designs will be displayed for everyone to see. To top it off, you get exposure as well. This might even open doors for your future design career. What is the first thing that you think Fred will need? Of course, a logo. Fred has not come up with a name yet for his coffee shop and simply would like you to provide him with logo ideas first. You can actually think of a couple of ideas and simply want to start creating. I would like you to write down words, draw concepts, and identify colors that come to mind when you think about a logo for Fred's coffee shop. Please don't be pedantic about your drawing or creative ability. This is not what the exercise is about. I simply want you to generate ideas for now. Please keep these ideas as we will use them for our next lesson. As promised in lesson 1, I will give you something extra since you got this far. If you would like to explore the Adobe programs, you are able to download a 7-day free trial by simply visiting their website. We will be focusing on a new program every week, so this gives you enough time to work on all 3 programs: Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. Be sure to time your downloads accordingly, otherwise the trial will expire too soon, since it is possible to download one app or program at a time. In lesson 3 and 4, which is next week, we will be working in Adobe Illustrator. Lesson 5 and 6 will be time spent in Adobe Photoshop, and lesson 7 and 8 will be focused on Adobe InDesign. But since Shaw Academy has a partnership with Adobe, you will be able to extend your free Photoshop trial for 30 days. That's an additional 22 days on top of your free trial. How awesome is that? To top it off, since you attended both lesson 1 and 2 of your professional diploma in graphic design, you will also be provided with the code to get an additional 15% off your Adobe package. You will be able to access all and any Adobe programs you desire. You should receive an email within the next couple of days providing you with a unique code. So what are you waiting for? These 3 programs are the industry standard and used by almost all professionals at a discounted price. This was one lesson, jam-packed with content. I hope you took something away from this, as these are the most important concepts any designer should be aware of. In our next lesson, we will look at the design cycle or pipeline and at setting up an effective client brief relating to the type of questions you will need to ask your client to aid in your design process. We will also look at the various types of logos we get. We will then work in Adobe Illustrator, so be sure to get it downloaded if you have not done so already. If you're new to Adobe Illustrator, kindly note that the trial can be downloaded for 7 days, whereafter you will need to pay a monthly subscription fee. Just to summarize, we examined the various elements of design, which include space, line, shape or form, size or scale, color, texture, and value. Then we discussed the principles of design: focal point or emphasis, contrast, balance, movement, rhythm or pattern, and unity. We saw how the 4 laws of Gestalt, proximity, similarity, continuity, and closure, create unity in a design. Visual hierarchy is what all your elements and principles should create when applied successfully. Well done on completing your second lesson of Module 1. I would like you to send any feedback or suggestions, since by doing this, we can only improve our courses. You can send your email to support@shawacademy.com. Remember to rate this lesson at the end. 1 will mean that you did not like it at all, whereas a 10 will mean that you really enjoyed this lesson. Thank you so much for joining me in this lesson today. I really hope that you enjoyed and gained valuable insight with lesson 2. Don't miss out on your discount for the Adobe package, and I'll see you next time.